Hello and welcome to SN. I am Ashwin Ahmad and I'm talking to Ms. Seema Sirohi, an esteemed international analyst based in Washington, D.C., working with the Economic Times. Seema, we are in very exciting times with Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi. The famous Modi rally is going to have President Trump here. Now, what I wanted to ask you, the implications. What does this mean? Is it a reach out, obviously, to the Indian American community? But at the same time, is Mr. Trump signaling his intentions to Prime Minister Modi in India? How do you view this?
Well, it's a very important sort of development, I would say, because it has never happened before that a US president would appear at a foreign leader's rally. That said, I think both sides have their eyes on politics. For Trump, the 2020 re-election is coming up. So he has a captive audience of 50,000 Indian Americans, some of whom may be swayed to vote for him instead of the Democratic Party. For Modi, it's a huge PR coup because in the aftermath of India's decision on Kashmir, there's been a lot of criticism. So when Trump appears with Modi, he's signaling to the world and to Pakistan in particular that the US India relationship is important. It cannot be derailed by Kashmir. And basically, he is showing his support.
Seema, I wanted to come to another, very current topic. Both India and the US would be very concerned about the recent drone strikes on, oil plants in Saudi Arabia. Now, what I want to ask you is specifically with regard to Trump. I mean, this also he puts him again with against the U.S. neocon because they blame the strikes on Iran. How do you see this panning out in the run up to the 2020 elections for him?
See, it's too soon to say. Information about where the strikes came from is unclear. Just this morning, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said that they did not come from Iraq as earlier suspected. So I think it's all very uncertain right now. But one thing is certain, that it's Trump's tendency is not to start new wars. If you remember that he had a big difference with John Bolton, the national security advisor who just got sacked the other day, that he wanted the US to strike Iran after a US drone was shot down. And Trump was resistant, and ultimately he did not go for it. He does not want to start new wars because he won his election partly because he had promised he's going to end the never ending wars in Afghanistan and elsewhere. So I would wait to see how it develops. The Saudis might also think twice about, trying to instigate something more than is necessary.
Do you think a sideline meet is still on the cards, though, between Trump that was being talked about between Trump and Rouhani? There's a lot of rumors going on. Do you think that's a possibility?
It is a possibility, but it depends on intelligence information about where this strike on the Saudi oil fields came from. It would be hard for Modi, I'm sorry, it would be hard for President Trump to justify meeting Rouhani in that kind of background. But he has made it very clear that he does want to meet Rouhani. In fact, it was one of the points of disagreement between him and Bolton.
Right.
He wants some kind of tinkering with the Iran nuclear deal so that he can say that he got a better deal than President Obama did and then move on.
Seema, I also want to come now to the domestic side of it. I mean, Trump obviously he sacked Bolton, but Bolton obviously hasn't gone quietly. There's been, talk of him funding other Republican candidates. So, how do you see this panning out? At the same time, the neocon lobby is part of Trump's constituency, but at the same time, he is. Angering them and isolating them to an extent. Do you see serious challenges coming up to Trump with Bolton's exit in the run up to the polls? How do you see this panning out?
Frankly, I don't. Bolton is a bureaucratic mastermind, but in terms of political appeal, he has zero. So Trump has his base all sewed up. His base is very strong, very, very supportive of Trump, and especially if he can manage to pull off a kind of withdrawal from Afghanistan, or something that he can claim as a withdrawal of US troops, it's a win for Trump. So I don't see Bolton really being a threat to Trump in any meaningful way. You see the Republican Party and how it developed kind of a pro-Trump stance. Nobody opposes Trump anymore. In fact, the Republican Party is Trump's party now. So this is too sort of in the weeds kind of speculation that Bolton is going to be a threat. No, I don't think so.
Okay. So, what do you think now going forward? Trump doesn't really have a win per se. I mean, what I mean in terms of foreign affairs, George Bush sold himself as the guy who got Saddam. Obama sold himself as the guy who got Bin Laden. So, Trump, in that sense, he's tried, but he hasn't got a foreign policy win yet. Will do you think that will affect him in the run up to the polls again, or do you think his America First campaign will see him through? How do you see it going forward?
It's there is still a year and a half before the vote, so I think it's too early to say. Many things can happen between now and then. There
Mhm.
could be a reworked Iran deal. There could be partial troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. Even a minor trade deal with India could be declared as a victory. It's being speculated that Trump and Modi will have signed a trade deal, or Piyush Goyal is coming here, the commerce minister,
Yeah.
and they're doing the final touches. With China, something could be worked out. So, and it's the way you project things. And the masters of spin are all in the United States. They will spin,
Yes.
a small development as a big victory. You just never know. There's lots of time. It's a it's an eternity in terms of politics between now and 2020.
But I have to ask you, is there any serious candidate within the Republicans or perhaps even within the Democratic Party that could pose a threat to Trump? I mean, especially Indian origin Americans. Is there any talk of any serious threat emerging to him?
Well, the polls have shown that in a direct race between Joe Biden and Trump, that Biden might win. So yes, from the Democratic side, there's clearly a very distinct possibility that a real contest could develop. Within the Republican Party, there are two people who have said they want to challenge Trump, but I
Right.
doubt that they will be serious, because you need a lot of money to fight a US election, or increasingly even an Indian election. So um, I I would wait, because the Democratic field is still too crowded. We have to see who emerges as the winner of the Democratic primary. Elizabeth Warren is doing very well, But the Indian American origin candidates are not doing as well. Kamala Harris is not getting any traction. Her background in terms of her criminal justice record when she was the Attorney General of California is is problematic. She doesn't have the full support of the African American community. The other person is like Tulsi Gabbard is supposed to be a
Yeah.
Hindu American, the first Hindu American to enter the US Congress. She, I don't think, has any chance at all because her track record, again, she is too much of a wild card in terms of foreign policy credentials. She has gone and met Assad in Syria, and so she's taken radical positions. I don't see the Democratic Party going behind her.
Now, I bring the conversation because this is, I mean, whichever way you portray it, this is a win for our prime minister. I mean, at least something he will proudly showcase at home. So, what I wanted to ask you is, will we see the end of, this Trump, I'll mediate, no, I won't mediate on Kashmir? Will we see a more, mellow Trump in the sense that I want to do business with India. I'm not going to do this Kashmir business with India anymore.
More likely than before, because already he has moderated his position on mediation.
Right.
He has accepted that it's a bilateral issue, and that he quoted Prime Minister Modi as saying that he's got the situation under control when the two of them met around the G7 summit in France. So
Right.
I would say that he has pretty much accepted that it should be solved bilaterally. Also, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan hasn't endeared himself to the West at all, with all his threats and, daily threats of a possibility of a nuclear war, etc., etc. It's highly irresponsible, and nothing frightens the West more
Mhm.
than threat of a nuclear exchange between any two countries, and India and Pakistan are no exception. So I think what Trump would like is a trade victory with India. And
Right.
if the political managers of Modi can pull that off, I
Uh-huh.
think that'd be a great step forward.
Do you see that happening? Is it? You
I
do.
do. There is a very high likelihood that they'll announce something, because the pressure is coming from the top. Because Modi and Trump decided they wanted it in
Mhm.
France. So
Right.
the US trade representative, that is Robert Lighthizer, who's a very hardline negotiator, has been told to figure out something, to hammer out something. And from what I'm hearing in Washington, there's pressure from some Republican members of the Congress as well on
Mhm.
Lighthizer to do a deal with India as a something that would propel better and a bigger deal later on. So
Mhm.
their argument is restore India's benefits under GSP that were withdrawn in June.
Sure.
Um, and that would be something that would incentivize India to move further on what the US wants.
Well, that's very good news for India on the trade front. But I want to bring you now to a topic that, of course, concerns India, Afghanistan. I mean, we've had the president of the United States talking directly with the Taliban, cutting out Pakistan, and then now again, it's gone to the fact that there's going to be no deal with the Taliban as of now. So, how do you see his position on Afghanistan? moving forward? How do you see any will Pakistan have any role at all to play? How do you see Trump's dynamics in this?
See, it all depends. Now, who becomes the national security advisor and what Secretary Pompeo guesses as to what Trump wants.
Right,
So, Secretary of State Pompeo will do what Trump wants. The talks are suspended, I would say. They are not totally off the table. They may restart, and then Pakistan's role would again become somewhat important.
right.
And because the entire leadership of the Taliban is beholden to Pakistan, and the Pakistani games can start all over again. So, from India's point of view, that always is remains a possibility because the presence of U.S. troops provides a security cover for India.
Right.
And if the troops withdraw, they're not supposed to entirely withdraw, but let's say 50% of them are gone. Yes, it would impact India's development projects, etc., to some extent. But increasingly, the Afghan national security forces are stronger, they're better equipped. And
Hmm.
also, if the Taliban come to some agreement to share power, they would not want to blow up a dam that India built, right? Because that would be just insane, because
Hmm.
everybody needs water. So we just have to wait and see. The talks could restart. Right now, it's not clear because they have another crisis in Saudi Arabia and Iran right now, which they're dealing with.
Absolutely. And that's again, I come back to that crisis. The big concern for both India and the United States is Saudi Arabia and, of course, oil and oil security. So, I mean, Trump has been very measured on this so far. We haven't seen any inflammatory statements from him on Twitter. Apart from him, I think, promising the Saudi crown prince better defense systems if they do need it. What measures do you see, and what role do you see Trump taking with regard to the Saudis? Do you think that he'll, persuade them to, ease up on their campaign on Yemen, given the threat the Houthis are posing?
Um, I would hope so. Right now, the situation is just too muddled for any thread in US policy to clearly emerge. But most people in Washington would do not, especially the Democrats, do not want President Trump to act on the behest of the Saudis. There's a lot of anger in the Democratic Party against Saudi Arabia after the killing of Khashoggi in the consulate, in the Saudi consulate. And the Democrats will put pressure and they will kind of restrain, tie up Trump's hands to some extent. And the Pentagon itself will put up resistance to any, on the spur, on the fly kind of attack because the
Mhm.
Saudis said so. No, that is unlikely to happen. So, more likely is that the Saudis will be told to calm down.
Okay. And domestically, again, we had a president who changed all the rules with America first. I mean, we've never seen anything like this with the Mexican wall, etc. Do you think, as we run up to 2020, that this is going to be a similar kind of campaign from Trump? Are his supporters expecting the same? Are you seeing a gradual changing in maybe politicians and people's attitudes as well? Are we going to see a similar Trump campaign as we go into 2020?
It'll be centered in terms of domestic issues. It'll be centered around immigration control for sure, because nobody can deny, not even the Democrats, that there is an immigration crisis at the southern border of the United States.
Mhm.
Thousands of people are lined up. They don't have, the US system doesn't have the capacity to deal with that. So
Right.
that will certainly be an issue. And how that impacts Indian Americans. There are many, many Indian illegal immigrants as well in the country.
Yes. Yes.
So that's something to look at going forward. It'll be an extremely polarized campaign and debate, because the Democrats, from what you can see in terms of the debates they've had among their own potential candidates, they are all set to paint Trump as a racist, as a person who doesn't represent American values. So you can just imagine the rest. It's going to be a very bitter, angry kind of campaign going into 2020.
Seema, I just finally want to ask you now. I mean, one thing that we've noticed when Trump, in his campaign, he has targeted, Hispanics, the black community, etc. But one thing I've noticed is that by and large, he's left the Indian community alone in his attacks. So I want to know, I mean, how important is the Indian community for President Trump, electorally and otherwise? And are we going to see Indian faces in his? Are we likely to see Indian faces in his administration going forward? More
Well,
Indian faces.
we've had quite a few already. We had Nikki Haley. We have Ajit Pai, who's the
Yes.
right? So there are many already. The Indian American community is important. It's the richest and the most well educated ethnic group in the United States. So it does wield political power, but it is kind of tight fisted, so it doesn't put in as much money as politicians would like. So they're
Mm-hmm.
always uh, courting the Indian vote, because whatever money they do donate is important, and every vote counts in some constituency where it can be very, very close.
Mm-hmm.
As Hillary Clinton learned to her chagrin that some few votes, if they had gone this way or that way in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, she might have been the president. So every vote counts, and to that extent, the good thing about Trump is that he's the only presidential candidate in 2016 to have come to an Indian American rally, to have met, to made an
Yes.
appearance, to appeal for the vote. And by coming for Modi's rally now, he will try to cement that. So he will try to sway the vote a little bit. And who knows, some people might vote for him, although most of the Indian Americans lean towards the Democratic Party.
A quick comment from you before I let you go on India-American relations, as you see them now, and perhaps going forward a little bit.
The relationship is very strong. It's gone beyond Democrat or Republican politics, just as it has gone beyond Congress Party and BJP politics in India. It is important for India to have the US. Similarly, it's important for the US to have India as a balancer in Asia. That's not going to change. So it will only get stronger with time. The only downside, or the thing that creates trouble off and on, is trade issues. So
Right.
if the economic side of the relationship can be sorted out a little bit better, then there's no stopping it.
Seema, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your insights. It was a pleasure talking to you. And everyone else, thank you for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you.